Welcome to ONLA Webinars. And whether you're joining us live or on demand, we thank you so much for being with us. We have a great webinar for you today, a sample of invasive horticultural plants in Oklahoma from an educator's point of view with John Haase. So let's get started. John?
Great. Hi, Howard. I hope everyone's doing well. I am not a Zoom person and not real great at this, so you'll have to bear with me. Let's see if I can put my screen on here. All right, I guess you can see that. Okay. Yeah, I've just a little bit about me. I've been with Extension since 2002. I have, before that, my wife and I owned and operated a garden center here in Claremore, Oklahoma. And before that, for 20 years. And before that, I worked at Greenleaf Nursery as a supervisor for a couple of years right out of OSU, and graduated there in '79. So I've had a pretty varied career in all types of landscape horticulture. I got more into the general horticulture field when I did become an extension educator with OSU. So I'm here in Rogers County, and since in the last 18 years, I've seen a lot of different instances, helped a lot of people out, homeowner-wise, commercial-wise, landscape, trees, shrubs. So this PowerPoint is something that I've been kind of interested in the last probably 8 or 9 years, is invasive plants. I'm not going to say that I'm an expert by any means. Some of you all that's out there probably have a lot more experience with it, have done a lot more studying on it, have probably been more involved in like the Invasive Plant Council that Oklahoma has, and on and on. I have shown this PowerPoint or versions of it at different horticultural meetings, especially the horticulture industry show that we've had pretty much every January. I did this first one back in, I believe, 6 years ago. And I was more interested in it then. I had just gotten a master's degree, and was trying to get some more feel for what was going on in the plant area and where I could help, because I did notice a big influx of invasive plants, or maybe I just woke up and started paying attention to them better. So around the county that I'm involved in, Rogers County and Claremore, especially with the calorie pear invasion and some other items I'll go over in the talk, it just became apparent that if I can get a little bit better versed at this and help homeowners out with maybe some suggestions on what to plant and maybe how to control some invasive plants that they have in their own landscape, and maybe how to encourage others to plant more, I guess you'd say, tame plants as opposed to invasives. I feel like I'm doing a decent job in this aspect anyway. So yeah, invasive plants in Oklahoma from my point of view, extension educator for Rogers County. So we'll get started here. Just real quick, I wanted to let everybody know that I didn't experience the ice storm, or we didn't in this area like a lot of you did, and I feel bad for everyone. I know my sister lives in northwest part of Oklahoma City and is still without power and has limbs, as far as last night, were still blocking her driveway. So it's really rough to go through. These are some pictures I just grabbed, one from the internet and one from actually from the Cimarron Valley Research Station up at Perkins. The one on the right is a pecan tree that's just completely flattened by the ice. So yeah, it's going to be a lot of cleanup and a lot of effort there. We had a similar storm in 2007, but it was in the dead of winter, and a lot of cleanup and problems, but and power outages, but the leaves weren't on the trees, so I don't think the damage was quite as extensive as it was there. So anyway, yeah. Okay, so back to our talk. I hope I'm not reading this completely, but sometimes it just bears kind of a narrative as such. So what is an invasive species, just to kind of bring it down to the basic level? There's a federal definition which says, let's see if I can move my picture over here. An invasive species is an alien species whose introduction does or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. And that is for any kind of invasive species. And of course, plants may have a little bit of detrimental health effects to humans, but I think they're talking more about insects and animals. So it's a non-native or alien to the ecosystem. It's aggressive, it grows outside of the desired boundaries, and it outcompetes with natives. And there again, this is the broad definition. So this can be plants, animals, other organisms. The big problem with us and plants is that we're the ones that bring the problems into our backyard, I guess you'd say. We're the basic mode of transportation. So we see a plant that we love and we want other people to benefit from it. Or in the nursery trade as such, you know, they want to sell them because they're maybe easy to grow, they flower nice, they catch on, they're a marketing tool. And, you know, there again, I'll get into this later, and a lot of times it is fine, but there's a small percentage of plants that become a huge problem. So why are they a problem? Well, as you probably know, they displace the native community and reduce the biodiversity. They cause the detrimental economic effects. Millions of dollars are spent pretty much every year to control and eradicate. There's a loss of production and habitat in native landscapes. They alter and increase the intensity of wildfires, which we've had our overshare of this year in different states. Create monocultures. They can hybridize with native plants and become kind of a super spreader. I guess you'd want to, I don't know if that's a right term or not, but decreasing livestock production is an issue, disrupting the nutrient and water cycles. They compete with native pollinators. Even the plants can, because some pollinators are not attracted to certain invasive plants. And as they take over, there's a decrease of pollinators. And they have a negative impact on threatened and endangered species. So invasive plants, they are a big problem everywhere in Oklahoma. And the two I'm showing here are actually here, but you would look at this one, and I don't know if my little cursor is working, but anyway, I hope it is. You would think, well, this looks like a picture from Alabama, is it? No, it's in Claremore, Oklahoma. And kudzu is documented in 25 different counties here in Oklahoma the last time I checked. This is actually a picture I took back in 2014, and it's along Dog Creek. It was documented several years before that, and I wasn't really that aware of it. And then when I saw it, I kind of jumped on it and documented it again and sent it to some folks that at Oklahoma State and the Invasive Plant Council. The caveat with that is that, you know, if a municipality that's kind of charged with maybe helping to manage this or eradicate an invasive species like this, if they don't have the money, they can't really do anything about it. So the kudzu is still there. It has been burnt back by some rough winters, but it continues to be there as a presence. So as our winters get warmer and the summers get hotter, I can see it spreading worse and worse. And then the next one here is Eastern Red Cedar, and you think of maybe Payne County or somewhere out west, but Rogers County has their share. And of course, as you probably know, Eastern Red Cedar is documented in all 77 counties. So there again, this Eastern Red Cedar is a native, and most of you probably know the background on it. It's just a native plant that was controlled by natural fire, natural burning back before the Western expansion. And then as we came, we started suppressing fire, keeping it under control. And little by little, the Eastern Red Cedar started to take off. And it's a huge problem in, you know, just about any pasture or land you go to that has any open area, unless it's controlled. Here's a big one. This one's gotten huge in the last probably 10 years, maybe 15 years. Calorie pear. Just to cut to the chase, you see this everywhere. It's in all 77 counties in Oklahoma. It's become one of the big ones that I try to educate my master gardeners on, as far as not planting it, not planting any kind of ornamental pear, because they have a tendency to put on tiny mutated fruit, and the birds love them, and then they spread them pretty much everywhere. And you see it all over in urban, suburban areas, right-of-ways, parks, railroad track right-of-ways. So it's become a huge issue. And every spring I get customers, clients, homeowners, people that don't know any better call and ask, what are these beautiful trees out there blooming right now? And it's a good opportunity actually for me to say, that's not one that you want. And anybody that has dealt with these species in their fence line, in right-of-ways, and backyards, whatever, they know what an issue it is. It's not an easily controlled plant when you're trying to get rid of it. Okay, so what makes a plant potentially invasive? Several things. They're well adapted to the climate and soils of the area. They have high reproductive success. They grow and spread rapidly. And if the environmental conditions are favorable and they have a lack of natural predators, they usually don't have the competitors, and a lot of times they're disease resistant. And that's the weird thing about, it's not a weird thing, it's actually makes sense. If a nurseryman or anyone was looking for a plant to introduce to a different area, and you saw something that grew fast, had nice blooms, had pretty color, berries, something that was attractive to the eye, you would naturally think, well, this is a cool plant. I'm going to propagate it and give it away or sell it or whatever. And so the majority of the plants that we have problems with are that way. They have all the attributes that someone would want for their landscape, you know, at first. And then it becomes too much of a good thing because, as you know, the runners spread, they spread up the trees, or they take over the regular landscape, they outgrow their area, and then they have the reproductive success that ultimately makes them an invasive. So when is an exotic or even a native plant not a problem? Many don't cause harm to the economy, our environment, or our health. Most introduced species, which I'll go that direction right now, they don't survive out in the landscape if they're not tended to. Only about 15% that do survive go on to become a problem. And I just found a few species that I thought, were pretty well much what you call maybe well-behaved: shantung maple, sawtooth oak, crepe myrtle, Atlas cedar, and Russian sage. I can't pronounce things today. And then I was looking up a couple of these just to check on them, and I saw this map in Wisconsin. They're going, oh yeah, about sawtooth oak. They have a law against that variety. And then there's 3 other states that have at least you're on a watch list for sawtooth oak, which is, I don't know if you'd consider it an invasive. In certain areas it is, and in certain areas it's not. It's been, I guess you'd say, well behaved in Oklahoma, but there's other plants that are very invasive and noxious in other states, like barberry, and we don't seem to have as much problem with it here. So that is one thing about our country, or the U.S., especially if you get to different ecosystems, that a plant that's invasive here may not be somewhere else, and vice versa. We are kind of included in the Southeast and show up in a lot of publications for invasive plants. And one of the books that I'll talk about here in a little bit is a good manual explaining that. And I've actually taken several varieties from this manual, and I'm going to show it off here. So the other thing is most invasives take a lot of years to really become a problem. So this is an example of Chinese privet, Ligustrum sinensis. It was introduced back in the 1850s. It just sat there. It didn't become a problem really until the mid 1900s. And as you can see, probably in the 50s, a lot more landscaping, and people were noticed how popular and how great these plants were with hedges. And a lot of, as you probably remember, some of the older folks like me remember privet hedges from the 50s and 60s. I remember growing up with some, and they were popular, but I don't think at the time they realized that the berries would be dispersed by birds and go everywhere. Maybe somebody did, and they just didn't get the word out. But now that it's 30, 40, 50 years later, we realize that Chinese privet anyway, most of the varieties were not I guess you'd say we're a mistake, because we're fighting them. Of course, then we kind of revert back to the advantages of native plants. I just thought I'd throw this in here because just to throw that out. Most everyone, I'm sure, that watches this, especially like if I'm referencing master gardeners, which, I teach the class most every year. The general public is becoming more aware of how great, or how native plants need to be used more and kept alive and propagated and just planted, because they're well adapted to our climate. They don't spread prolifically. through the landscape. Not a lot of them. There's still a few. And there again, I can't really say that all exotics are terrible and all natives are beautiful. You know, it's one of those things where each one has its merit, and there again, 95% of native plants are probably fine, but in certain areas they become a problem. You know, native plants work together with insects and other species of animals, and they work hand in hand. And we can help that by maintaining the diversity, avoiding planting a monoculture of even natives, and stuff like that. So it's important that we keep that in mind too when we're dealing with native plants. Okay, some of the major horticultural plant problems we have, and this is a list that I condensed from the, and I'll show you a picture of it. It's a fact sheet that the Natural Resource Ecology Management Division or college at OSU came up with. They have a fact sheet out that was published about 5 or 6 years ago. Really well documented, or well put together fact sheet. And it has all these varieties on there with the picture, where it came from, how it was introduced, why it's a problem, and then the traits and control measures, and then some alternative plants. And I'm going to go through about 5 or 6 of these with the slide for each. But there again, there's a lot of these in here that may not be, I guess you'd say, horticulture related. And some are, some aren't. And so I'm not going to, linger on some of these in here because they're more of a pasture rangeland issue. Some are horticulture related though. And there again, it's one of these things where I don't have time to really touch on all of them, but some of the specific ones I've had encounters with, I'd like to, explore, talk about more. And here's the fact sheet. It's problem horticultural plants, and this is the number. So you can just go to a search engine and type in NREM 2895, and it will usually come up. And OSU is kind of redoing their website. So when you go there, you may see a couple of different ways to download it. But just remember too that OSU does have, they still produce fact sheets that are available. So this is like a 16-page one that probably costs you $3 or $4 to print it off with toner. But you can go to your local county office, and if they don't have it in stock, they can order you one at no charge. So there's still ways you can go through the extension service and get a lot of these fact sheets for no charge. So on this NREM fact sheet, it talks about the plant species, the origin, the introduction, the traits, the effects, the management, and alternatives. So I'm going to kind of go through a few of these just to show you what this fact sheet talks about, to kind of, I guess, give you an overview of a few plants that I've come in contact with that, and if I have any personal dealings with it, like I said, I'll try to throw that in there with it. And there again, these are plants that I guess I'm trying to get some redemption, because when we had our garden center, there was several of these plants that we promoted and sold. And, at the time, I wasn't really that aware of how invasive a lot of the plants I sold were. So it's one of those things where now I realize that, and I'm not saying that you can't plant them. I have no, regulatory authority, but it's just something to make people aware of, I guess. And hopefully the public will spread the news, and we can turn the tide a little bit on it. So autumn olive and Russian olive are two different species, but they both came from Europe and Asia in the late 1800s for ornamental and windbreak purposes. They form real dense thickets. They're tolerant of most soil types. They're abundant seed producers, and it makes the birds love them and spread their seed. In certain areas, not every part of the state, but a lot of the western areas of the state and western the U.S., they outcompete native vegetation, invade grasslands, and make wildfires worse. Management techniques are usually cutting and treating the stumps with a labeled herbicide for effective control. And you do pretty much have to do that because they re-sprout. Alternatives for these are listed in this fact sheet, and I just threw those in too to just kind of point that out. Mexican plum, American beautyberry, eastern redbud, Carolina buckthorn. And there again, this is not a complete list of all the alternatives. There's probably all kinds of different ones that could be recommended and planted that aren't as much of a problem as the Russian or autumn olive. Okay, next we have my favorite, the Calorie pear. Came from China, introduced in 1909 to attempt to control fire blight. I didn't know that until I looked this up. It's a medium-sized tree. It tolerates all kinds of different soils and environmental conditions. As you well know, it grows rapidly, forms dense, thorny thickets. This is the seed part. And I'm sure if it could be propagated from cuttings. If that, like a bud fell, if it was able to propagate itself, it would do that too. But most of the issues are from seed sprouts. Of course, they outcompete native species. They displace native vegetation. And on the control management, small trees or even the larger ones can be foliar sprayed, but you really have to pay attention to drift and the droplet size. So, if you're going to do anything like this, you've got to really control the drift and even the volatilization of the herbicide. So you have to use the right chemical. Cut and treat stumps of larger trees because they do re-sprout. And then you've got eastern redbud, flowering crabapple, American Mexican plum. Chinese privet, we talked about a little bit. It's another issue, big issue. Came from China, the mid 1800s. Most of you know what they do. They easily reproduce from root suckers. The seed is dispersed by birds. They dominate understory of woodland areas, right-of-ways, parklands. Chemical application of herbicides, and you can mechanically remove them. On this one, in my own experience with my yard, and we're on 2 acres, and there's a slope that goes down to a pond that's next door, and there was a bunch that have started sprouting and growing in there. And I kind of wondered where they came from because I'd never planted any kind of privet in our yard. And when I walk out in the neighborhood sometimes, going down the street, it's a small neighborhood and it's in a rural area out east of Claremore, but it's a housing addition. I was like, where are these privets coming from? And I happened to find a couple, just 2 or 3 that are probably the parents of all these sprouts that I've been pulling out or trying to cut and kill the stumps with. One looked like a variegated privet, and I felt bad because that's one I used to really promote for like a privacy hedge back in the garden center days. So, you know, at the time it seemed like a good idea. But now I know that there's a lot better varieties that will stay under control. And this is like Indian currant, chokeberry, and other native shrubs. Chinese wisteria and Japanese wisteria. You probably know about that one, where they came from. A lot of these were brought in the 1800s, you know, back during Western expansion, ornamental plants. And the thing about these is they're still really marketed heavy. I was looking them up on the internet last night, actually, and you know, you still see a huge amount of mail order advertisement for wisteria. And it, I don't know, you know, if that's ever going to end. So, you know, what the vines do and how they take over. And it's hard to get rid of them, because we had one that I went ahead and planted in our yard, and I regret it, because after part of the main trunk died back and I started getting resprouting, it never just really looked like the tree form I wanted it to look like. So I eradicated it, I thought. I cut the stump back and treated it like with a crossbow, which is triclopyr and 2,4-D at the stump. And it did seem to kill it back really good. But for 4 years now, they're still sprouting. And I've tried to dig up every piece of root and everything, and I still have not won the battle completely. We have other native plants in there now, so it's impossible to go in and try to use a herbicide on them. I don't want to disturb or ruin any other plants that's in that flower bed area. So it's something I really regret doing. But then again, there's American wisteria that is similar, not near as invasive, trumpet creeper and Virginia creeper as alternatives. Excuse me. So Eastern red cedar's in the list of the fact sheet, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I kind of talked about it earlier. It's native to Oklahoma. It flourishes when there's a fire suppression, and it's been planted a lot and encouraged, marketed as a, you know, as an evergreen ornamental. Not that every one of them becomes an issue, but as the cedar spread, it does. The one thing about it is if you can get them young and cut them off, they don't resprout. That's one interesting thing. I do know a guy I know that is kind of a companion, working companion that lives in Stillwater and works for the Xerces Society. He was able to sign on to a USDA or NRCS program, and he had to spend quite a bit of money, but he got the recoup back, cost share money back on trying to get him off his property. And I don't remember the exact amount, but it seemed like he spent $1,500 to $2,000, and the total bill was about $5,000 or $6,000. So it really did pay him to sign up for that program. And I don't know all the parameters of it. So it would be best if you have that situation to get a hold of your local NRCS expert there and let them, I'm hoping that it's still, you know, enforced, that they have the cost share program for Eastern red cedar removal on your property. So Anyway, of course, there's a lot of other, some native pines, true cedar, Arizona cypress that can be marketed and promoted to substitute for red cedar. Japanese honeysuckle is another really bad invasive that, you know, I used to sell, so I'm trying to get redemption there again. Came from Japan and Korea, early 1800s, planted for wildlife, erosion control, forage, and you know how perennial and aggressive it can be. Just as fast as it grows, you know, I should have known back then that it can be a problem. And there again, that's one that I found in our area, in our yard, more in the natural area. We kind of let an acre go back to native trees and shrubs and just let it alone. And some honeysuckles started sprouting there. I've been able to chemically control it and do a directed spray and not go crazy with it, so it hasn't hurt trees and shrubs that's around there and other ground covers. But there again, I don't know where it came from, probably somewhere in our neighborhood. And you know, I'm trying to keep it out of control, or keep it from being out of control. Mechanically removed and foliar applied herbicides is usually the way to go. And then there's some substitutes that are not going to be quite as great looking or have the blooms, but you know, if you're looking for another type of ground cover, you can look for some that are not quite as invasive, I'll put it that way. Here's some invasive plants. You know, some of them are question marks that are marketed in the nursery trade. And there again, I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes as far as what I feel like should be stopped as far as promoting or selling. It's just kind of a flag here that's like, oh, here's one that could be a problem. And all of these are listed on the invasive.org site. And that's one of the problems I'm going to get into here in a minute, is the, you know, the discrepancy or the challenge, because a lot of plants in one part of the country just are not a problem in other parts. So it almost has to be a state by state jurisdiction and regulatory arm that can deal with this. So anyway, these plants here, and I don't need to, I've covered several of them already. So, you know, English ivy I didn't think was a real problem, but the more I look into it, it has become a problem, even in our part of the state. Standard Nandina, I don't know. I think it is in the southeast, and we're on kind of the northwest edge of the southeast part of the country, but they can become a problem. So, you know, I still kind of like to promote Nandina, but now I'm starting to like think maybe I should just go with more of the dwarf type, the compact type. I don't know if, you know, it depends, I guess, on just how they propagate and spread. Burning bush, I've still got one in my yard, a big one. And I know that we've got several sprouts that's come up in other areas. So that's one that can be an issue, at least in the northeast part of Oklahoma. So all of these, you know, have an issue. It does depend on how big and where you're at, but it's something to take into consideration. And here's just the starting of the other part of the talk about the discrepancies in our laws and regulatory issues. We have a noxious weed list for all states, and these are surrounding states. We've got Missouri, Kansas, Texas, New Mexico, Arkansas, Colorado. You know, you can see they're Missouri 11 up to Colorado with 71. You get to Oklahoma and we only have 3. Canada thistle, musk thistle, and Scotch thistle. There are other plants, believe me, just like Callery pear, that may not be a noxious weed, but they're should be considered on the restrictive list. And we just haven't got there yet. So Oklahoma, unfortunately, is just kind of behind as far as our how we document, maybe not how we document, but the actual laws that's put out there. So some other major challenges with that is adding the species to the weed and noxious weed and nuisance species list. There's an inconsistency in ranking them of the states and agencies. There's an incomplete and delay mapping of the occurrences. And I've noticed that on some of the maps I've looked at. And some of the plants that I actually have documented aren't showing up yet in the counties that I've found them in. And I realize sometimes there's just a lag of getting them on the right source map. Example, Kudzu, just to throw this out, introduced back in 1876, millions of acres of the US are invaded. The cost is tremendous per year in lost production and eradication if they're choosing to do that. It's one of the top 100 world's worst invaders. It's listed as a noxious weed in 19 states, and yet it's still legal in Oklahoma. There's nothing in our laws that I know of yet that makes it illegal to grow or propagate. Then there's other challenges, political, social, that just make it harder for an invasive plant to get either documented, thrown out as far as being marketed. And even if it's really illegal to really use or there's still people that are going to pass it around and share it, you know. A lot of water type plants. I know water hyacinths are still one of those that, you know, if they escape where they are contained in someone's backyard or waterfall or water feature, they can become a big issue. Maybe not in Oklahoma, but where we don't get as cold winters. And in fact, there's a master gardener that put one in a fountain at our demonstration or teaching garden. And, you know, it's an educational process, and I'm going to get into that right now. Control options for selective invasive plants. This is just kind of some stuff that, well, I found, but I really think this is a good way to kind of look at it. Surveillance and early detection, active surveying, get volunteers involved, get effective controls at the first appearance, try to isolate the infection, and IPM is important, cultural, mechanical, chemical, and even biological control. And if you haven't been familiar with the weevils that are used for musk thistle, that's been a fairly successful program. And we used to have thistle dispersal events where they were grown and cultured, and then they were given to farmers and ranchers and landowners and distributed on their thistle crops. They're not really crops, but they're infestations. And they did a really good job in Rogers County. So there's a lot of different methods that can be used for this. And then education, of course, is what I'm trying to do, and hopefully what you guys can do too on your own to educate the public. since there are, some CEU or partly for this talk, I was just going to real quickly go over some chemical control options. Here's a list from the book I'm going to show off here in a minute on herbicides that are mainly used for vegetation control. Some of these you do have to have a private applicator license or a commercial, depending on if you're doing it for hire or not. But if you're wanting to use restricted use chemicals, like a few of these in here, you have to get a private applicator license. Of course, glyphosate has been around a while, and a lot of times it is used. It's not the best sometimes as far as actually eradicating the problem, but as far as being less risk for spreading, volatilizing, and movement in soil, that's a good way to go. So if you're going to try a chemical, I would definitely try a glyphosate formulation. And before I go any further, always read the label. The label is the law. And use your protective, personal protective equipment. If it says, goggles, use goggles. If it says a Tyvek suit, do it. Latex gloves, do it. There's no escape from that. It needs to be done. There's some different chemical names on here because trade names vary from state to state, and this was produced, I believe, in Georgia on this booklet. So some of these may not be the same trade names, or this was done, 15 years ago, and now you have a lot of generic formulations and other sub trade names, or not sub, but other trade names that like Garland, triclopyr. One that comes to mind is called Remedy. But as long as that Remedy label covers the invasive weed that you're wanting to control, you're fine. There again, you're not supposed to use a chemical off-label. So that's as far as I can really go. I mean, if it's the exact same chemical and you mix it the same way, then it's always better to get, to talk to whoever, if you have a supervisor or someone that you have to check in with to make sure that it's within the law. But normally, if it's not, the distributor should not be selling it if it's an off-label application. So, okay, so you see the different ones here. I'm just going to go, but like I said, the labels, availability, and trade names vary. You could have this one here called Vanquish, and it could have a totally different name. So, as long as it's dicamba and it's labeled for woody brush or whatever, you should be okay. Of course, if you're into the spraying and control, if you have any job description, or if you're doing this as a homeowner or whatever, you probably know some of this. I mean, it's a foliar spraying. You can do stem injection, which I've never really done, but I've seen it done, and it does work. You use a lot less chemical, and it's much less risk around desirable landscape materials. There's cut and treat is what I did here this fall with several different, some invasive, some not invasive, but they were in the way. So cutting them and applying a type of herbicide that is labeled for that at the right percentage is a good way to treat that. A basal spray is spraying the chemical right at the base of the tree, and it's absorbing through the trunk. And then the soil spot I've never tried as far as, I mean, it's basically applying it to the soil like a soil sterilant. But you do have to really watch what you're using on that, because if there's soil movement, it can be a real issue, you know, especially if you've got a rainy season and it's a persistent herbicide and it's running off to areas it's not supposed to run off to. You can really do a lot of damage and get into some major litigation. So be sure there again, read the label, understand the products before you start applying. Here's just a few, and I know we're about out of time. Wing burning bush. I'm just going to kind of go real quickly through a couple of these because they're basically all the same. And this is why I like this book that I'm going to promote here in a minute, or I'm already promoting it. But it tells you some different control procedures and what to use on them. So just, you know, I don't need to spend a lot of time on this. It just, what I like about this is it tells you kind of a rate to go by and kind of how to attack the plant itself, and gives you some good options and the times of the year to work with. So just to flip through here, Chinese privet, pretty much the same thing, but there again, they probably found through their experience in spraying, if it needs to be, you know, a certain percentage of like triclopyr, and how to apply it as a basal spray maybe works better than a cut and stump, cut and apply method. So it gives you some different options. Bush honeysuckle, I've had a really bad experience with those. In my yard, I thought that there was one that I finally dug out of the yard that, you know, I realized, oh, this is an invasive bush honeysuckle. I don't want it here. And thought I got rid of the only bad one in the whole yard, and then walked down the hill into the trees and saw 5 or 6 more. And then on the neighbor's property, there's probably 10 or 15 more than that. So I've got my work cut out for me. I've got the ones killed that were in our property, but I'm going to have to work on the ones in the neighbors. Whether they know it or not, I don't know. If I talk to them, I'm sure they'll be okay with trying to get them out. But the thing is, you know, they're attractive certain times of the year, so it is an educational process for people to understand that it's really not the best plant to have. Non-native roses, that's a pretty big issue in certain parts of the state. It's got a procedure for that. And I'm going to just go ahead and finish here. Winter creeper, climbing euonymus. One recommendation is for Tordon, and just remember that that one's a restricted use chemical, and you've got to be careful with non-target plants on that one. Bamboo, that can be a big issue in certain areas. So I'm pretty much done with that. Here's the book that I got a lot of this information from. It is a field guide for identification and control, and it's available on the web at no charge if you wanted to download the PDF and use it as a reference. And just real quick before I finish, this just came out today, so I thought I would throw this out. The Oklahoma Invasive Plant Council is starting up some monthly seminars and or webinar series. And November 12th, there's the first one, and I guess the cost is free. So you just go to www.okinvasive.org to register. And it is, you know, Invasive Plant Council. So it's exactly ties into this talk very well. So I just thought I'd throw that out for everybody if you're interested. And Here's the links and references to the presentation I just gave. And I appreciate the time and attention. I hope I didn't bore you too bad, but that's all I have. I guess I'm done, Summer. Is there any chat or anything, or how does that work?
All right. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask John before we go? Let's see, we got a question. We've got a couple of questions, John. John, if you click on the Q&A down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see them.
All right, let me see if I can. Oh, yeah, I see it. All right, let's see. Just to comment, there's a product called Tordon RTU. Is it a picloram that is pre-mixed and ready to use? Yes, it is, and I have used it. Be sure and, make sure that you can buy it. Okay, I don't know if the RTU is, I actually got it from a neighbor that had bought it, and I just used it myself, so I was probably in violation. But I think the RTUs are okay to buy. You don't have to have a license. I think the concentrates, you do have to have a applicator license. But yes, it's pre-mixed and designed to use. And be sure and follow the directions. I know that I read it, and it was supposed to be used within a certain period of time. So before it heals over. Okay, the next one is, you mentioned a liatris. Some are problematic, some aren't. I don't know where I saw liatris there. I don't remember saying liatris. If you can type that back in, I don't know of any liatris that's a real issue. I know they're native plants and I've promoted them, but they may be in certain areas of the country, but I don't think Oklahoma there's a problem. And then Jeff said it isn't an RUP. Okay, the Tordon I've got was a ready to use product, but if it isn't, then if you can buy it, it's probably all right. But the vendor should ask you for a restricted use or a private applicator license. Okay, a couple more. Are there any chemicals that can be applied to prevent suckering but not damage the rest of the tree? Yeah, there's one called Monterey Sucker Stopper, and it's a growth regulator product. I don't know where, you could probably find it on the internet, or if you have connections to like Winfield or another chemical supplier for commercial use, you can probably find it that way. And I don't know exactly the chemical name, I'm trying to think of it, but the one I'm familiar with is Monterey, and it's called Sucker Stopper. Okay. Maybe not getting this straight, but it seems like there was a blazing star listed. I don't think that was in my material. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. I don't think that was on my PowerPoint. I'll go back through and look at it. And if it's something that was on there that shouldn't be, I will sure get it off of there and I'll probably let Summer know that one way or the other, if it was on the PowerPoint by mistake or not. Okay, anything else?
All right, any other questions for John?
All right, thank you too. Appreciate your watching this. Sometimes it's a marathon to watch a Zoom presentation.
Well, John, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your great webinar.
Okay, appreciate it. You guys have a good rest of the day and a weekend. Good weekend.
Sounds great. And thanks everybody for joining us today, whether you're live or on demand. We appreciate you. Thanks so much.